Hello, and welcome to Frontlines of Social Good, the weekly news and views program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I'm Jay Frost, and we begin, as always, with the top 5 gifts of the week, and then a look at the headlines shaping the philanthropic landscape. Then in our first segment today, we examine the growing threats to journalism with Clayton Weimers, Executive Director of Reporters Without Borders, USA. We'll explore what's at risk following recent government cuts to public media. In our second segment, we'll talk with Alex Curley, founder of Adopt a Station and author of the semi-public newsletter through his own online publication. Alex will share bold ideas for reimagining the role of public broadcasting and how stations can survive and thrive through community-led innovation. Let's get started. First, here are the top 5 gifts of the week. Coming in at number 5, $18.86 million from Len Blavatnik and the Blavatnik Family Foundation to Harvard Medical School, extending their long-standing support of Blavatnik Therapeutics Challenge Awards and launching the new Blavatnik Institute Early Career Investigator Awards. Coming in at number 4, $22 million from Stuart and Molly Sloan to the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, adding to their prior commitment of $78 million for a total now of $100 million. The gift will focus on enabling the center to expand the work and impact of the Sloan Precision Oncology Initiative by making research discoveries that are successfully translated into new targeted therapies for patients. Coming in at number 3, $65 million from the Daniel G. and Carol L. Kamen and the Kamen Family Foundation to UPMC Presbyterian Hospital to help the healthcare system's innovations and patient care ahead of the 2027 opening of its new bed tower in Oakland. At number 2, $75 million from the Douglas M. Noble Family Foundation to Holy Name Medical Center in Teaneck, New Jersey. This gift will help support a sweeping expansion effort as Holy Name enters its 100th year. Funding will go toward clinical programs growth, capital improvements, and the launch of a graduate medical education program to address the physician shortage. It will also establish a new neuro and endovascular institute and expand the level 3 neonatal intensive care unit. This is the largest single donation in the hospital's history and the largest ever to a Catholic hospital in the United States. And topping the list this week at number 1, $100 million in a matching grant from Joan and Sanford Weill to launch a $200 million initiative for the Weill Cancer Hub West. The initiative creates a collaborative research hub uniting scientists from UCSF and Stanford Medicine to transform cancer care within the next decade. Have we missed a major gift announcement this week? We almost certainly have. Let us know by contacting me directly through LinkedIn or by email at j@donorsearch.net. Now, here is probably the most important story shaping the nonprofit and philanthropic sector this week. In a joint investigation by the Chronicle of Philanthropy and Associated Press, it has been revealed that there are widespread disruptions in government grant funding among many nonprofits that depend on it for core operations. Earlier this year, the Trump administration froze or eliminated numerous federal grants affecting services like housing, food assistance, early childhood education, and refugee resettlement. The actions, carried out with limited transparency, have created significant uncertainty for organizations nationwide. According to the Urban Institute, nonprofits received over $267 billion in government grants in 2021 alone. In 433 of 435 congressional districts, the typical nonprofit would run a deficit without public funding, according to Associated Press. In Laguna Beach, California, for example, Friendship Shelter relies on public dollars for a full 77% of its $15 million budget. When access to federal funds froze in February, the organization was forced to seek short-term foundation support. Funding its CEO says cannot meet long-term needs. These cuts have prompted legal challenges as well. A federal judge issued a temporary injunction to resume some payments, but many nonprofits remain in limbo as agencies reassess funding priorities. Private funders are attempting to respond. The Samueli Foundation, for example, in Orange County, expanded its grant making from $19 million to in 2022 to $125 million this year, but received over 1,200 applications, requesting a total of $250 million for just $10 million in available funds. In areas like the Bronx, where 84% of nonprofits rely on federal funding, some organizations have laid off staff or suspended programs, and sector leaders warn that continued cuts could lead to widespread service reductions and disruptions in housing, healthcare, and education. The investigations conclude that private philanthropy, while essential, cannot replace government support at scale. Now, while many of those in the nonprofit sector have been navigating these funding freezes and cuts, another pillar of public life, independent journalism, is facing a parallel crisis. Earlier this year, House Republicans voted to eliminate all federal funding for PBS and NPR, calling for full defunding of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This is something we've been covering over several weeks in this program. The move has come amid global threats to press freedom as well. In the United States, watchdog organizations have noted increasing hostility towards journalists, a decline in public trust, and a rise in online harassment. According to Reporters Without Borders, the U.S. now ranks 55th out of 180 countries in its 2024 World Press Freedom Index, citing concerns over media polarization, corporate consolidation, and a lack of legal protection for reporters. For many, these developments are part of a broader pattern, the erosion of free and independent media, whether through direct political attacks, defunding efforts, or a growing confusion between public media and so-called state-run outlets. To help make sense of these developments, we turn now to a conversation with Clayton Weimers, U.S. Executive Director of Reporters Without Borders, also known internationally as RSF. Based in Washington, D.C., Weimers leads RSF's work defending press freedom and journalist safety throughout the Americas. He's also been a vocal advocate for the distinction between public service media and government-controlled news, warning that the conflation of these two is not only inaccurate, but potentially dangerous. We spoke earlier about the political targeting of public media in the US, how those moves echo broader global trends, and what's at stake for journalism in a democracy. Here's that conversation. So Clayton, thank you very much for taking time to talk today about Reporters Without Borders and your work. Maybe I could begin by just asking you to describe RSF a little bit.
Yeah, RSF, or Reporters Without Borders, we're known by our French acronym, Reporters Sans Frontières, because we were founded in France 40 years ago to this year. But we now are a global press freedom nonprofit NGO that has offices in 13 countries around the world and a network of correspondents that spans about 150 countries. So we are able to touch pretty much every part of the world. We consider ourselves the world's largest organization that's devoted to the safety, independence, and pluralism of journalism. And one thing that I think makes us a little bit distinct as an organization is we don't just think of press freedom in the classical terms of journalist safety and making sure that that journalists are safe in war zones and properly outfitted or getting them out of jail when they've been arrested. We do all that work, to be sure, but we also need to think of press freedom as everyone's right to access reliable information, because at the end of the day, that's what journalism is all about. That's what makes it such a pillar of democracy, is that ordinary citizens get the information they need to act in their daily lives. And in many places around the world, journalists aren't being killed necessarily, but journalism is being killed. And that has a particularly pernicious effect on press freedom if you look at it in a holistic sense. And so that's really our vision for press freedom around the world.
And here in the US, I know we'll talk about both the US and the globe, but here in the US, what is the primary threat to journalistic freedom here?
Well, the thing is, there isn't just one, and that's what makes it especially difficult. So RSF publishes an index on press freedom every year where we rank 180 countries according to their relative press freedom. And we measure this on 5 indicators: economic, security, cultural, political, and legislative. And on all five indicators, we've seen a steady decline in the United States going back a decade, to the point where, the United States, when we first started doing the index, was 17th in the world. In 2025, we are 57th in the world. That's a staggering decline in that amount of time. And what you learn from parsing the data is that it's not just one thing, it's a little bit of everything. And the biggest indicator that's taken a dive in recent years is the economic indicator. That shouldn't be too surprising to anyone who's been paying attention to the news media industry. There's been thousands of layoffs year after year in the industry. Newspapers and stations are closing all over the country. There's something like 2 local newspapers that go out of business every week in this country. And so we're seeing an expansion of what we call news deserts, parts of the country where there is no access to local news. And unfortunately, that problem is about to get a lot worse because just last week, the Senate voted to claw back all of the funding that goes to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funds local, independent, public media affiliate stations all over the country. And the ones that are going to be the most impacted are the ones on the front lines of the news desert, the ones who are broadcasting in places where there is maybe no other local source of trustworthy news.
I was just speaking with someone today about the lack of those news deserts, those broadcast news deserts. And one of the potential pushbacks against that assessment is, well, can't people just use their cell phones, sort of like they can watch Netflix on their phones? But that assumes that you have reception, that assumes that you can pay for the account. There are a lot of assumptions baked into that. It also doesn't take into account how there's been a reduction in local news, and particularly local papers, which you just alluded to. What are some of the main reasons why we are seeing this this decline in revenue and support for local media?
Well, this has been going on for a while. There's been a few developments that have really caused the news media industry to struggle. Namely, the advent of the internet has completely upended the business model, and the growth of sites like Facebook and Google, which have taken away a lot of the ad revenue that the news media industry typically relied on. That's just gone away. There's also now an expectation among the audience that content should be free. And so it's very difficult to convince people to pay for subscriptions. And even among the ones who are paying for their subscriptions, maybe they're subscribing to their local paper, maybe they're subscribing to the New York Times, but that's probably about it. And the result is that there are fewer and fewer voices that are able to find an economically viable model. That's not to say that some of them aren't succeeding, and there's a lot of great independent news organizations that are doing innovative things with how to fund themselves, and many more that are doing a lot to punch above their weight and do work at a quality that they have no business achieving given the resources they have. But that's kind of the amazing thing about journalism, is it's a field full of people who are really driven to do something because it's their mission, it's their calling. And so they're not ones to give up generally, especially in the face of the political pressure that they're under right now, which brings us to the newest factor in what is afflicting the economic health of the industry, which is the withdrawal of funding. The news media is really struggling to get money. The Facebooks and the Googles of the world took that ad revenue in the first place, but the trade-off was supposed to be you can at least share those links and get the clicks and make up for it in other ways. Increasingly, though, Meta as a company is pulling away from news. They're trying to make news less visible in our news feeds. They've also gone as far as completely banning news in any country that has suggested that they should have to pay for news content on Facebook. This happened in Australia. This happened in Canada. You can't get news on Facebook in Canada right now, or Instagram for that matter. They're doing it right now in Nigeria as well. And when the California legislature was debating a similar bill that would require the tech giants to pay for news content on their sites, the lobbying teams for those tech giants were able to completely change the bill into what amounted to an AI incubator that would be state funded instead, which was a pretty amazing coup for those lobbyists. But that just goes to show the lengths that they're willing to go to avoid paying for the news. Add on top of that the algorithms that deliver the content to those phones that you're talking about is geared away from journalism. It's geared towards sensationalist content, incendiary content, fake news, rumors, AI generated content increasingly. It does not do well with journalism, or rather, journalism does not do well in these algorithms because it's not designed for engagement. It's designed to inform. Content that's designed for engagement doesn't necessarily inform you, and that's a key problem for the way the gatekeepers of digital information are operating their businesses right now. Is it's a closed off system that doesn't prioritize any sort of social good.
I can't believe I'm about to ask you this, but I think I need to ask you for the audience to define journalism as a profession, what the
Hmm.
task is. And the reason I'm asking that is because when you just talked about Meta, for example, closing off the door to news, and there are a variety of reasons. I'm sure that they have said that they're doing that. Uh, most people, when they look at their feed, at least here in the U.S. and I think around the world, would constantly see all these posts that seem like they're news, and of course, a lot of it is incendiary by nature. It's these shares of things to get people to stick with the content, to stick with that platform. But the reason I'm asking this is because I'm not sure at this point how many people are differentiating between a true journalistic piece and some other piece of content. Can you help us make that distinction?
Well, that's a really good point because we have reached a point for the first time in our history where journalistic content is harder to distinguish from other types of content, and it's competing in the exact same space as other content in a way it never did before. I mean, to oversimplify things, journalism is the collection of information for its mass dissemination. It's going out and learning something and then telling people what you learned. And it also involves a whole host of ethics that have been developed over the course of the past century, ethics that have their origin right here in the United States, by the way, that ensure that there are processes in place that you can trust the information. Does that mean that the news is never going to get it wrong? Absolutely not. Does it mean the news is never going to make mistakes? I guarantee you that we will never be there. But it does mean that at the very least, when mistakes are made, they can be owned up to. And when you disagree with something, at least you can follow along with how they reach that conclusion. Journalists need to be upfront about certain things. They need to be clear that they're talking to real sources who are authoritative, who know what they're talking about. They need to do fact checking. They need to clear things. They need to be honest about who employs them. They need to, a news organization needs to be clear about who's paying the bills and who's making the editorial decisions. These are the kind of things that you don't get from your random social media influencer, content creator type person who may be delivering reliable information, but isn't necessarily following these well-trodden ethical guidelines that have existed for a long time that ensure that the information is reliable.
And I think that's a great segue to discussion of public media in the US because they would abide by these journalistic codes of ethics, correct?
Absolutely. Any journalist worth their salt would. It's what you learn in journalism school. It's what you learn as a rookie reporter at a newspaper or at a television station. Um, the thing about public media, though, is at this time of growing distrust between the public and the news media, public media enjoys some of the highest trust ratings across the board. That's precisely because of the model. People understand that it's funded by a combination of government grants and the audience. And so the audience can expect that the media itself is not beholden to any sort of financial interest. That's what's such a shame about the targeting of public media is that it's going after some of the most trustworthy journalism in the country.
Are you hearing from people who are, I guess, in the audience of your organization about how they're responding to some of these latest changes in government funding?
Well, it's a little soon to say, but I think the expectation is that there will be layoffs and there will be programming cuts and there will be stations that close. I saw one station manager in Texas said that of the 10 public television stations in Texas, he expects 6 of them to close. That's a massive loss for the audience. There are small rural stations all over the country who rely on those Corporation for Public Broadcasting grants for 30-40% of their budget. If you take away 40% of a news organization's budget, it's very hard to survive at that point. And you're probably not going to make up the difference with donations from your audience, because chances are this is a news environment where the news might not be commercially viable. But that's very different from it being socially necessary. And that's what I think is kind of getting lost in this discussion is, there's always that suggestion, well, they can just go to, other private news sources. There might not be a local news source that people can turn to in some of these parts of the country. The problem of news deserts is really getting out of hand in this country. Not to mention, when people lose their local source of news, they're going to turn to other sources of news. And so their choices are either the type of pink slime journalism that spreads misinformation or false information, or they're going to go to national news sources that have much less in common with them, that don't understand their communities, that aren't reporting from on the ground. When you lose your public radio, your public television station, that's one less reporter at your local school board meeting or at your local town council up at the scene of a crime in your community. That's one less local story that matters to you that you're going to hear.
I know that in the past, this is ancient history now, but in the world of largely print and literal broadcast media, that sometimes these concerns existed even then, and there would be roll-ups where small local papers might get together with others in order to survive, to maintain some local coverage, but it would be spread out maybe a little bit further as a result. So maybe you wouldn't have the local coverage of that high school sports team or something like that. But what you're talking about sounds a lot more pernicious. And also, I'm not sure if the economics of today's environment would support that. So I want to put a fine point on that. For the public broadcasting stations that are out there, for example, is there an opportunity for them to combine forces in order to continue providing local coverage and have, I don't know, some way of broadcasting to a greater degree over towers, or to rely more on the internet for distribution? Is that even possible or effective?
I think those are conversations that are starting to happen. We've seen examples of that previously, because even before this latest round of cuts, a lot of the news media is struggling to make enough money to operate. It is expensive to do journalism. It's not cheap. It's not just, someone sitting in front of a computer, writing whatever they think. Journalists have to go out into the field and they have to report, and then maintaining towers and then maintaining presses. All of this stuff is very expensive. Pooling resources might be a way that some stations find they're going to be able to get by, but there's a lot of stations that just aren't going to be able to do that for various reasons, because of their geography, because of the economics of their particular market. It's just not going to support it. I was reading the other day about a radio station in rural Alaska that has one full-time employee. And he's not exactly sure, but he thinks he serves an audience of about 1,800 people that are spread out over a territory, the size of most counties elsewhere in the country. There's not really another good way for them to communicate information in such a remote place other than terrestrial radio. And I'll add another point that's specific to terrestrial radio, is that we've seen time and time again, when a crisis unfolds, it is the most reliable source of information for actionable information that will keep you and your family safe. We saw this in the Southern California wildfires last year. We saw it during the flooding in North Carolina last year. We saw it during the flood in Texas just a few weeks ago. When ecological disasters unfold, the internet becomes a cesspool of misinformation. It really brings out the worst of social media. People turn to their local public radio station because it can continue broadcasting because of the way the technology works, and because they know it's a reliable source of information. They're not going to get the wrong information. And so it becomes, a matter of health and safety that these communities have access to reliable sources of information.
maybe just the last question on this front, and this part of the conversation, which is about business models. I know for a number of years now, some journalistic outlets have, whether they're broadcast or print or even digital, have gone nonprofit as one way to not only to maintain their business and their distribution, but also just as a choice to
Mhm.
make an offering that is demonstrably a social good, even though arguably journalism always is, that this was a business model that was more in keeping with more aligned with those values. Are you getting a sense that there are more, you know, broadcasters or other that are newspapers that are going that route of the nonprofit route?
Yeah, it is definitely a discussion that I keep hearing come up when I go to, conferences or anywhere where a lot of newsroom leaders are hanging around. It's also a conversation that seems to be happening in the world of philanthropy because it's one of the ways that funders can help is by helping navigate the process of going from a for-profit business model to a nonprofit business model. It can work. It's not going to work in every single situation. It really does require a lot of buy-in from your audience and from your community. But for those who can make it work, I think it's really worth considering because, like I said, the public media stations that are being targeted by these cuts ranked among the most trustworthy news organizations in this country. Nonprofit news has that same built-in advantage of being a little more trustworthy because the audience doesn't have to question what the motives are behind ownership.
You've talked about that several times about the trust element here, and also how much support there is among the population. We saw that with a number of people who contacted their representatives in Washington. You're based out of the DC area. The organization is right here, at least the US branch. So, what is your sense about what people are saying on the Hill about all this and how this vote went this way when there has traditionally been such bipartisan support, both arguably not only for public media, but for journalism?
The unfortunate truth is that this became a pet project for President Trump, and he has tremendous influence over the Republican Party. Only two Republicans voted to stop this in the Senate. When you're right to note that there's been a long tradition of bipartisan recognition of the value of public media. An unfortunate thing about this moment we're living in is that Trump has managed to politicize the news itself and press freedom itself. Press freedom can't be a political issue. It can't be partisan. It needs to, it's woven into our Constitution. It's a deep part of who we are as a country, as Americans. And it is becoming increasingly difficult to do this work that we do at RSF because of that politicization. It's becoming a left versus right thing, whereas 10, 15 years ago, it really wasn't. This was a conversation we could have with Republicans and Democrats, especially when we're talking about things like journalists who are being jailed abroad or killed abroad. Those were no-brainer common areas that we could all get on the same page about. It's getting harder and harder to have those conversations.
And you just mentioned safety again right there. And I believe wasn't this the year of record number of deaths and injuries of journalists reporting in the field?
Um, the numbers are high. It's not quite a record at the moment. Well, it's July 22nd, so
Oh,
as of the time we're having this conversation, so we will see. I can tell you at this exact moment there are 580 journalists behind bars around the world. Uh, that is about as high of a number as we've ever seen. And the problem seems to be getting worse. We talk all the time about this problem of impunity for crimes against journalists. Something like 90% of crimes committed against journalists around the world never see justice done. We see extrajudicial killings. We see a lot of cartel killings in Mexico, for example, but we also see assassinations of journalists in Russia or in Southeast Asia. We see threats in India, in South America. It's really a global problem that seems to be getting worse. And one of the reasons it's getting worse is because the leaders who carry out these attacks against journalists just don't suffer consequences the way they might once have. The taboo against journalist violence seems to be fading away, and the bar for retaliating against a journalist seems to be lowering.
Why is that?
I think it's an impunity problem. It's the international system has been largely unable to stop the killings of journalists. You know, I go back a lot to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi Washington Post columnist who was lured into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and then murdered and dismembered on the orders of Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And at the time, there was so much public outcry. Um, I believe President Biden said that after that incident, he would make sure that Saudi Arabia was a pariah in the international community. But the furor really died down after about a year or so. And, today Saudi Arabia is anything but a pariah in the international community. They're buying sports teams and sponsoring sports events. They're hosting huge global music festivals. They've really established themselves as a country that's modernizing, yes, but at the expense of freedoms within that country, certainly at the expense of press freedom. But there doesn't seem to have been any consequence for it. And I think a lot of bad actors look at incidents like that, or they look at the disproportionate killing of journalists in Gaza by the Israeli military, and they say, there are no consequences to suffer here. So it really lowers the bar for bad behavior.
So then, again, taking that wide view and then bringing that focus down to the U.S. again, are there some lessons to be learned, and are there some warning signs for us that are particular to our environment, not just in terms of what the media means to us, how we can make it useful and effective for us, how we can ensure its freedom and its safety, but also maybe the message it sends to the world?
Yeah, well, I will say very little of what we're seeing unfold right now in the United States is new. It's something that we've seen it in other countries all around the world, but we've seen it in countries that have slid back from democracy into authoritarianism or quasi-authoritarianism. And that's hugely concerning because there's a lot of research on this, is that once you lose the democratic tenets in society, it's very hard to build them back. In fact, it's very rare for a country to slip into autocracy and then come back to democracy. It takes a lot of concerted work. And we appear to be going through a period right now where we're seeing democratic values being chipped away. And chief among them is press freedom. We have one of our many trite sayings in the community is there is no freedom without press freedom, but it is completely true. It is one of the freedoms upon which the others are predicated. If you don't have access to reliable information about your community or about your country or about your world, you can't meaningfully participate in a democratic society. You just can't do it. And so that's why press freedom in and of itself is so important to democracy. We don't defend journalists because journalists are some special class of citizens or they deserve special treatment. We defend them because of the service that they provide to the rest of us. We need access to the information that they have and that they're disseminating.
If people want to learn more about the work that you all do, especially the Freedom Index, how can they do that?
Sure, you can go to rsf.org. We publish quite a lot. There's always something interesting to read about. We release a bunch of reports over the course of the year, but we also have statements reacting to the news of the day, wherever it may be unfolding. So I would encourage you to go to rsf.org and look around.
Thank you so much, Clayton. Really appreciate it. My thanks again to Clayton for sharing his insights on this topic. It's complicated, and it's great to have his fresh eyes and to share it with us, especially in the impact sector. Now we're going to continue our exploration of the intersection of philanthropy and public media and what it means for this broader impact sector, from nonprofit journalism to community trust and civic infrastructure. National headlines, of course, have been focusing on federal threats to public media funding, but much of the innovation and the potential for renewal is unfolding locally, often through decentralized models driven by civic-minded entrepreneurs and funders. And at the heart of that evolution is people, or rather are people, like our next guest, Alex Curley. Alex is the creator of Semi-Public, a data-driven Substack unpacking how public media has drifted from its civic mission and what it will take to reclaim it. He also founded something quite recently that you'll want to take a look at. We'll make sure to include it in the chat, called Adopt a Station, community-powered platform that pairs donors with public radio stations facing deep federal funding cuts, often in smaller or economically vulnerable markets. With more than a decade of experience at NPR, serving as a product manager for its public radio satellite system and working as a producer and director, he brings both technical expertise and institutional insight into this work. He's now in Asheville, North Carolina, where he continues his research, writing, and platform building at that intersection of public service media and local communities. Alex, thanks very much for being here to share today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor.
It's really, really great to have you. And again, this is so fresh for many of us that we don't necessarily have the depth of knowledge that you would have, but also the objectivity that you would bring to this discussion. But maybe we can start by just inviting you to tell us a little bit about Semi-Public, what caused you to launch it and what its role is.
Yeah, sure. Like you mentioned, I was at NPR for almost a decade. We talk about funding challenges that have happened in journalism in the last few years. I was part of NPR's 2023 layoffs. I got a job very quickly back at NPR, but the public radio satellite system where I worked is run by NPR and by NPR employees, but it gets almost all of its funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And it lost a significant portion of its funding in October of last year. So they had to let a few people go, unfortunately, and I was a part of that. So I was looking for a job when in January, the FCC began to investigate NPR, PBS, and select public media stations. They were investigating, violations of public media's guidelines for accepting like corporate donations and sponsorships. They're called sponsorships. They were claiming that they were commercials, but it made clear that public media's federal funding was at risk. There was a lot of reporting that was happening about public media, especially public media stations that would using very vague numbers for how much they relied on federal funding. I did a lot of work with station finances when I was at NPR and a number of different roles when I was there. I knew how to find them. And I knew that I could provide an insight to help inform the conversation that was happening. So I first published a few articles in the Public Media Trade Journal, which were very popular. So I spun it off into Semi-Public, where I continued the data work.
And before we went live, you were telling me that this isn't the first time on this merry-go-round with public media kind of being under the watchful eye of the government, but maybe also some other critics in the ecosystem of media. Can you talk a little bit about where this came from, as well as where we are? Like what led up to this moment, and maybe what were the precursors to it that we should have been a little more mindful about or watchful for?
That's a good question. I think that this is an unprecedented moment, right? This specific moment is unprecedented in public media, but it's not the first time that one of the chambers of Congress has voted to remove federal funding from public media. It happened in 2011. The House of Representatives actually voted yes to remove the funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which, by the way, doesn't send money directly to NPR, PBS, or they send very little directly to NPR, PBS. Almost all of it is sent through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to local stations. So all these threats are, they're much worse for stations. But 2011, they did vote to remove it. There was a big outcry, and it didn't pass the Senate. Trump's first his first term in the White House, there were several attempts and conversations about ending the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's federal funding that were complicated by Sesame Street's. They struck a deal with HBO back in 2015. Sesame Street is run by Sesame. It's run by its own production company. It's not owned by PBS, but a lot of people point to Sesame Street as a reason why to keep public media and to keep it funded. So it hit a point in Trump's first term where Sesame Street struck a new deal. People inside the White House wanted to defund Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It didn't end up happening, but there were certainly warning signs from the first Trump administration that it may come to a head like it has for his second administration.
And now that you're writing, of course, the Substack, and you've been doing this for how long? When did you launch the semi-public? I don't remember.
I believe it was April, so not that long.
Not that long, but I know you've already had a reaction to both this and then the Adopt a Station, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But where's that reaction coming from, and what has it been like, both within the field itself, within the profession, public media folks who are in the know, but also the broader public who are probably kind of, surprised by this outcome, because there is still a lot of support for public media with or without Sesame Street.
Yeah, I really think that the public support for public media maybe has been a little misrepresented. I think there are a lot of people who support it. There were, there were studies done that showed that a majority of Americans supported it. But I think in the immediate aftermath of the passing of the rescissions package, which removes public media's federal funding for the next 2 fiscal years, it's probably been a little bit more negative than even I would have thought. But to answer your question, specifically for semi-public, it was always a very a very industry specific newsletter. And I knew that people were going to be interested in how much local stations actually relied on federal funding. I was hoping that they would be a little more interested, but before things came to a head with the rescissions package, it was mostly read by people within public media, but I have noticed that they didn't want to talk about how much they relied on federal funding in the past. They've changed their tune. And I think that was one of my big missions with semi-public, was to encourage stations to talk a little bit more openly about their financial situation. Public media is really great because all of their finances are publicly available. You can go to the website of your local public media station and read any type of financial report that you want. So that information wasn't hidden, but it wasn't being talked about. So I had a really good response to people who agreed within public media. And then I launched Adopt a Station a little bit less than a week ago, which it lists not just public radio stations, but also public television stations. And it lists them regardless of whether they're affiliated with NPR or PBS. So it's every CPB grantee out there. And the response to that has been tremendous.
Yes, talk for those who haven't seen it. Can you describe it, and also what's in it, both in terms of the content, but also the volume of it, and how in the world you gathered it?
Yeah, well, so the genesis of Adopt a Station was that I am part of a group of former public media employees, and we were sitting around on the Friday morning after the rescissions package had passed, basically asking, what do we do next? Just like everybody else in the public media system. Something that we were hearing time and time again from people who wanted to help was that they had no way of knowing which stations were most at risk. They wanted a really easy way to just look and see, like, if I had to give extra money, who would I give it to? And the idea to create Adopt a Station was born out of answering that question for people who wanted to help. So adoptastation.org is very simple. It has 2 steps. Number 1 is to find your local public media station, whichever one that you listen to, watch, and support, and either give to them if you're not giving, or to up your donation. The second part is that you get randomly paired with a public media station that stands to lose 50% or more of their total revenue. And it just happens at random. You don't get to choose it, you just get paired with them. And it sends you can click on a link to that station. So no money is changing hands through the station. It's just a pass-through for donations.
How were you gathering all that information?
So I got really lucky because I had already done all the work on federal funding reliance in public media stations for semi-public. And when the idea came up for the website, number 1, I used an AI tool to help build the website. Some people call it vibe coding. I'm not crazy about that phrase, but I did it. That's what happened. And I just made a copy of my data set of public media stations and I connected it to it. That's why I was able to get it out so quickly.
And now when you look back through that data, I'm sure you've been able to see some patterns that maybe a lot of us are missing. So what are you seeing in terms of where, especially things that surprised even you, in terms of where the money is a little bit better than you thought, but especially those stations that are in the greatest danger? Yeah,
that's a great question. There was a study that NPR did in 2011 that has been reported on. It was a bit of a secret, but it's been publicly reported on, where they basically set the worst case scenario for a station closing at losing 30% or more of their total revenue through federal funding cuts. And that was done in 2011 when the House of Representatives voted to remove public media's federal funding. What I'll say is that I've done a lot of extra work on, I have copies of just about every station's finances, and there's a lot more that goes into whether a station might close, other than losing a significant portion of their revenue. But basically, every station that's losing 50% or more of their revenue is at risk of closing. I mean, if you think about running your own store, right, and somebody came up to you and said, you're going to lose 50% of your revenue forever, that would be devastating. You probably would close. That's not to say that these stations will. Maybe hopefully they'll pull through, and hopefully with the help of Adopt a Station, they will, but that's basically it. And then, kind of dovetailing on earlier episodes of this podcast, and one of the patterns that I found was that stations that serve Native audiences were way more likely to be more dependent and therefore more at risk if they lose their federal funding. The same goes for, there's a group called the African American Public Radio Consortium. Both native stations and stations in the African American Public Radio Consortium, they have a much higher reliance on federal funding than other stations out in the world. So going back to Clayton's conversation, which was great, by the way, he's a great speaker on press freedom. But going back to Clayton's comments, these cuts are really, they affect the country unevenly, and they're mostly affecting Native audiences that are not white, and audiences that are in really rural areas like Alaska.
Yes, he mentioned that one station in Alaska that had only one employee, and I'm sure that even people listening in Alaska, unless they knew that one employee, might be surprised to find that. But I guess that brings up the bigger, broader issue, and I don't know if you can speak to this or not. Perhaps you can from past experience, or maybe you just have some thoughts in the future, which is for those who are not just utilizing Adopt a Station, but thinking about philanthropy, whether they're in the institutional realm of giving or individuals. How can funders shift from preserving institutions to enabling systems that can adapt and scale locally? Because it seems like one of the issues, of course, is if you're in a big market, maybe you have access to a lot more potential donors. And that seems to be the problem with some of these or the challenge for some of these kinds of stations you've described is it may be simply a matter of geography, that if you don't have as many people in your listening area, those people are still important people, that programming is still important to those people there, but there just may not be a lot of them. So for those who are trying to figure out, well, how can I give in a way that's meaningful and helps them to scale? Do you have any thoughts on this?
That's a great question. I think it really goes towards what the future of public media is, which is a huge question mark right now. I will say that if you are, on the development team of a public media station right now, you should be taking as many small gift donations as you can, while all of this is still fresh on people's minds. But you should be thinking about 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, right now, because the news cycle moves quickly. People may forget about public media, or the urgency may not be there. And there are a lot of donations coming in, which is really great. And especially to the small stations through Adopt a Station, actually, which was a pleasant surprise. But those small gift donations, even bigger ones that are happening right now, they're not in 2 years, a year, your station still has to make enough money to pay all of your salaries, upkeep your equipment, stuff like that. So I don't know what the answer is to how to change, but I know that there are a lot of people who are thinking about it right now. And I think in the next few months, it'll become clear what the future of funding public media is.
I do want to ask you a question that kind of gets in the weeds of fundraising. Oftentimes when there's a platform that's designed to help raise money for third parties, like in this case, it's a way for people to be matched to people, but there isn't money passing through Adopt a Station, if I'm understanding you correctly. So you're not taking anything from anybody. It's just helping people to find someone that they can support or a station they can support. But even though that seems quite clear, are you finding that there's almost a universal appreciation for and support for and kind of a rallying cry around this? Or are some people, maybe even within the public media realm, still a little skeptical, like, well, yeah, but that's our job? I mean, are you finding that public media is rising to this moment and partnering with groups groups, or in this case, individuals like yourself, or are they still kind of trying to figure this out?
I think the answer is both. I did a lot of work with fundraising messaging at NPR as a producer. I can tell you that just like any other organization, especially for smaller stations, they all have different needs. They all have different levels of approval to go through, specifically for messaging and strategies for fundraising. And I think one of the key advantages that I had was that I'm not employed by any public media station or entity right now. So, I mean, I had a background in fundraising messaging. I knew what would not be good for stations, but I just did it. I didn't have a lot of overhead. And I thought maybe if I sent maybe 1 or 2 donations to an at-risk station, then I would have succeeded. The reality is that it's much more successful than that. The response from stations has been really good. They're rising to meet the moment. There's nothing concrete yet, but I'm exploring ways to continue the momentum while people are still thinking about it. Because like I said, in a few months, people will have moved on to the next big issue. But on the site, about 18% of all the visitors to the site are clicking on a link to a station that is at risk. And that group of stations who are at risk, who are losing 50% or more of their funding, it's maybe 15 or 20 stations out of 580 plus. So 18% of people are clicking on a link to an at-risk station. I don't know if they're giving, but another 18% of people are clicking on any other public media station website. So not only are people like rising to give to at-risk stations, but there's also a halo effect that's happening for every other station. It's been it's wildly exceeded what we envisioned when we came up with the idea.
I would ask you what's next, but I think you just said you're kind of working through it to figure it out. So if I do want to ask you one last question, but before I do that, I do also want to give you the opportunity to just tell people how to find it once again, how to find both the Substack and Adopt a Station, even though it seems fairly intuitive.
Yeah, well, Adopt a Station is easy. It's adoptastation.org. You can search Alex Curley on Google. My Substack should show up. It's called Semi-Public. The URL is a little bit long for me to say out loud, but if you Google it, you will find it. And I have lots of plans for more content and articles coming up.
And we've just put that in the chat as well for those who are with us live. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes for others. I often ask at this point, if there was one thing that people could do, just taken from all your years' experience working with radio, but also trying to meet this moment, besides going and visiting the site, what would you encourage people who are interested in public media, not just the people within it, but others who are supportive of it? What would you encourage them to do right now?
I would encourage them to find an at-risk station. You can do it through adoptastation.org, but there's been a lot of really great journalism. And I would say not even giving to that station, but understanding the civic value of what they provide for their local community. I mean, Clayton did a really great job summarizing some of the Alaska stations. You can view what they're talking about. A lot of these stations that are at risk, they're doing all local content. They're not taking something from NPR, PBS. So if anybody on this call or watching this podcast could do one thing, I would encourage them to research a station they don't know anything about.
Thank you so much for this, Alex. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, closing up today, I do want to encourage you all to join us for this Thursday's program in the Philanthropy Mastermind series. That's our How to Raise show, where we're going to be taking a look at donor engagement in the digital age with a special guest, and that's Michelle Boggs, Senior Advisor for Fundraising at GoFundMe. So if you've ever wanted to know about crowdfunding, this is the time. She won't be just talking about GoFundMe, although that seems to be the big animal in the house, but rather about crowdfunding in general. So she'll be doing a session on that. That's at our new time of 2 p.m. Eastern while I'm here in the UK. Again, on Thursday, July 31st, How to Raise. It's called Meeting Donors Where They Are to Unlock More Support. She'll be addressing why traditional fundraising silos are holding organizations back, how to show up in the digital spaces where your donors already are, and how to empower supporters to fundraise on your behalf, those really important social ambassadors. You can check out also our current episode of the PM podcast, wherever you like to listen, or over on the website of DonorSearch's YouTube channel, as well as the DonorSearch website itself. This week, we have an interview with the legendary Kay Sprinkle Grace, and a new episode is dropping this Friday night with the new president of AFP and longtime philanthropy champion, Art Taylor. That's again dropping this Friday. You can register for any of our upcoming live sessions by visiting the website, once again, of our very generous sponsor, DonorSearch, the leader in responsible AI and donor research solutions for the nonprofit fundraising world at DonorSearch.net. And you can look for many of the episodes in all of our series right there under the Resources tab. Thanks again for spending time with us. We'll look forward to seeing you again next time. Till then, take care.